of business as public comment, if there is any. Seeing as there is no public comment, we'll move on to the FY21 budget overview. Is that Brittany or Michael?
Brittany will start us off.
Okay. And just so we know, which document are you speaking off of, Brittany?
I'll be speaking off of the FY21 budget overview document, PowerPoint, and also referring to the general fund overview as well. Okay, so good evening, everyone. So we'll begin the night with a very high-level overview of the general fund budget. So just some highlights. We have a balanced budget right now of $66 million. Of that budget, 76% is property taxes, and that includes excluded debt and new growth. 16% is state aid, 7% local receipts, and 2% from other sources. So overall, the general fund revenue is up approximately $2 million from FY20. The majority of that increase is due to Prop 2.5. And if you refer to the general fund overview spreadsheet, you'll see that Prop 2.5 went up to $1.1 million. So new growth. What is new growth? For those of you that don't know, it is revenue generated by construction, renovations, and other increases in the property tax base during the year. So if you look at the chart that I have to the right, you'll notice that back in 2010, when the recession was just ending, we were extremely low. And then each year we gradually increased and peaked in 2019. So of those years, we had some developments. The lanterns came in 2016, and that helped us with our new growth. We also had Ashland Woods. That was a 60-unit project. That was in 2014. And more recently, we had the Cirrus Apartments, also known as the Rail Transit District Apartments. Those were 398 units. And you'll see that in 2018, 2019, that's where we saw a bulk of that development be put on our tax roll. So 2020 and 21, we're expecting lower new growth. All the major developments are done now. We don't expect anything as big as the RTD right now on the horizon. So we've budgeted for a lower number in the future. So another factor impacting new growth are the land acquisitions that the town has recently done over the years. We've purchased a Valentine property, which is a huge parcel of land, a portion in the town forest, I believe Elliott Street, and a few others. So not only is that coming off, or developers can't purchase the land, so there won't be any land, it won't go on our tax rolls to be taxed on. We'll also see that impact on our debt service side. So it impacts the budget in two ways, on the revenue side and also on the expense side. State aid. So the governor released the initial FY21 state budget January 22nd. We're looking at a small increase of about $40,000 on the unrestricted municipal aid at $1.4 million. And Chapter 70, we're looking at an increase of about $200,000 to about a little over $8 million. So typically in the past, what we've done is we level funded state aid and utilized prior year's numbers to be conservative. More recently, in the last 2 years or so, we've pushed state aid up to where the governor's budget is, at least, to be a little bit more aggressive with our revenues. So local receipts is another category in our general fund revenue source. So local receipts are revenues other than real and personal property taxes. So that includes motor vehicle taxes, investment income, fees, and other charges. So these receipts are known as elastic revenues. So these are revenues that relate and are sensitive to changes in the economy. So if you think about motor vehicle excise tax. When the economy's doing good, people might feel good about themselves and go out and buy some new cars. So we've seen a huge increase in local receipts over the past few years. More specifically, building permits and fees has been fluctuating for the last couple of years, but we saw an increase in 2016 and 17, and that's when the RTD was coming online, and we saw a huge influx of building permit revenue come into the town. But as far as budgeting goes, we do not incorporate any of those one-time major development fees into our budget to be conservative. So from FY20 to FY21, you'll see a decrease on the general fund overview sheet of about $66,000, and that is primarily due to building permits going down and not really having any major project coming along down the road. So highlights of our expenditure side of our budget. General government makes up about 18.1% of our budget. The schools make up 52.7% of our budget. Keefe Tech, we have an assessment right now of a little over $1 million. So that's a decrease of $48,000 from the prior year. We received an assessment from the superintendent over at Keefe Tech. I don't have enrollment figures right now, but he's expecting at least a $50,000 decrease from the prior year. Debt service, we're looking at $5 million in total between excluded and non-excluded. That is 7.6% of our budget. You'll see an increase there of $950,000 from last year. $200,000 of it is for previously authorized projects from prior town meetings, and $750,000 is for the public safety building on the non-excluded side. Capital's going down to $500,000. That's a decrease of $250,000 from the prior year, and that is to help the debt service line in the public safety. Insurances right now, we're looking at about a 4% increase with the health insurance. And another item, if you look at the general fund overview page on the last line, you'll see overlay increasing from $150,000 to $200,000 on the back. And that is to allow for an increase in the senior tax exemption, which Michael can discuss next.
Thank you, Brittany. Before I move forward, are there any questions with what you have or have been presented so far? And if you don't mind,
Yeah, after you finish, we'll do some questions.
okay, because there's a couple of things I want to really kind of hit home and reiterate. So just getting into some more of the details regarding the general fund and the general government budget. The first thing we wanted to do this year is try to provide some more tax relief for seniors. So we are looking at increasing the tax exemption amount. That's the 41C.5 tax exemption for elderly residents that qualify by $100. This is going to be only the second increase since we started the program back in 2006. It started at about $500. In 2016, it hadn't been increased until 2016 when we wanted to increase it to about $650, and then again we're going to look at increasing it by another $100, so $750. I think this year so far we've got 157 residents that have qualified. It's a little bit lower than previous years where it's been about 170. So I think that's something that we're going to look into and see if there's a way we could better market this, for lack of a better term. The other thing that is a big part of this year's budget is this increase in the non-excluded debt. Brittany had touched upon it. We're looking at increasing that line item by almost $1 million. Part of that is for, as Brittany said, previously authorized projects like land purchases, the downtown project, et cetera. But then the bulk of it, $750,000, is we're looking at trying to pay for the public safety building within the levy limit. So at least $15 million of that. I'm assuming the building, right now, building costs are expected to be between $30,000 to $35,000, or 30, I wish, 30 to 35 million. So if we can do 15 million within the levy limit, meaning not raise taxes for that, we'd be able to cover about half the cost or a little bit less than half the cost. So how are we going to do that? How are we shifting the money into debt service? What is going to be impacted? And obviously we didn't look to the schools for this. I think that would be inappropriate. So we looked at utilizing approximately $500,000 in the general government line items, and then also $250,000 in capital to pay for the debt service. Now, this is going to mean you're going to see a decrease in that general government line item. I think it's going down by about $200,000. How we equate that $500,000 reduction is we take the 2.5% increase that is provided for in our financial policies and then subtracted about $500,000 off of that, and that's giving us the resulting number. We've had to make some really hard choices with regards to this, but we've done it in a way that doesn't impact existing service levels. So the first thing, in the police department, the chief made a very difficult decision to eliminate the deputy chief position that was proposed in the Ashland Police Department. It was never filled. I believe we'll be staying with, his plan is to stay with 2 lieutenants. We currently have a patrol officer opening, chief. It's a patrol officer? Due to a promotion. We are not looking at backfilling that position. It doesn't impact the boots on the ground. It just means we're not backfilling one position for a gentleman who will be promoted to sergeant in the very near future. On the fire department side, we're going to look at shifting more of the operational costs over to the ambulance fund. We also looked at our ambulance fees as part of this and adjusted them to something that's a little more appropriate for Metro West. And so again, we'll be shifting some of the fire department costs over to that. Also want to, it's not on the slide here, but I want to touch base on capital. We do see a decrease in capital, again, from our $750,000 line in pay-as-you-go to $500. It helps us with the public safety building project, but I also want to point out we've kept this at $750,000 for several years now, and then we've infused that line item with some free cash money in the fall. We're actually at a place where we're not able to complete, we don't have the manpower in place to complete the projects that we are actually authorizing. So I'm not anticipating a real impact from this reduction in the pay-as-you-go capital line. And then actually, I'm talking about reducing the general government services line, but so if you start looking within some of the details, we're actually able to enhance a few of the services. One, and I think that's something the town actually should be really, really proud about, is we were awarded a $750,000 SAFER grant. That is through the FEMA program. That actually pays for firefighters, 75% of a firefighter's full cost for the first 2 years. It goes down to 35% in the 3rd year, and then we're responsible for the full cost 4th year and beyond. Through this, we're actually going to be able to increase our staffing level by 1 person per shift. This brings us from four firefighters per shift when I started to 6 firefighters per shift. We still probably need to get around 8, but we've made some pretty good progress over the last couple of years, and really want to congratulate the fire department for working on that grant and being awarded that. It's a very competitive program. We tried for it last year and were unsuccessful. We've also added a communications and event coordinator actually this year. That is actually coming through the Economic Development Fund. Beth will talk about that a little bit later, but for the full year coming up in FY21, half of that will be paid out of the general fund, and actually we'll adjust the town manager's contracted services line for that. We've also allocated $64,000 for the maintenance of parks and trails that we have built and acquired. This always comes up when we look at buying land or when we look at building things. How are we going to maintain it in the future? We're starting to incorporate that as part of the budget now. And then if you remember last year, we talked about stormwater and not just necessarily putting the fees on the ratepayer, actually having the town contribute some due to our contribution to the stormwater issue. And so we'll be maintaining that at $30,000 this year too. So any questions on any of those so far? Just want to, Ryan's smiling.
It's percolating over there.
I've got a bunch, but I don't know how you want to handle questions.
Let's finish your presentation.
Just finish it up and I'll do the, so one of the things I always like to do is, talk about the value that we provide for Ashland taxpayers. If you look at our average single-family tax bill, a couple years ago we were actually smack in the middle. Ashland was smack in the middle of this. Over the last couple of years, we've actually lost a couple of spots. From one perspective, that's very good. It means we're able to offer services and we're able to do a lot more with less. On the other hand, I think it's indicative of, basically what our spending appetite is. And if we want to maintain a certain level of services, we are going to need to, spend a little bit more. It doesn't necessarily have to come out of the tax bill, but unfortunately in a town like Ashland, that's really where the majority of your revenue comes from. So there's not too much opportunity otherwise. I think a more accurate look at value comes through your expenditures per capita. And once again, this is, if you look at the 13 Metro West communities, once again, we're still second from the bottom. We're just above Marlboro and a little bit below Milford. So if you look at some of the things that we are able to accomplish, the land that we've been able to acquire, the projects that we've been able to do, and the services that we've been able to enhance, and you also look at where we have increased and maintained our long-term liability position in terms of rainy day fund and actually making a dent in our OPEB benefits or OPEB liability, while keeping this expenditure per capita pretty low. I think it's something that collectively we can all be pretty proud of, not just the administration. So there you go. I think Ryan forgot all of his questions already.
So that's not really a softball, but it's sort of a softball. First of all, thanks for putting all this together. You guys do a great job with this every year, so
Thanks. I think Brittany deserves most of the kudos on this one.
I appreciate it. I wonder if you just go back to the suggestion for paying for the public safety building.
Yep.
And the $15 million, I believe you said $750,000 per year. For how many years? And
That would
where does
be-
the other half of the costs come from?
So that's a good point. So that would be over 30 years. The other half would need to be paid for through a debt exclusion, and that requires both a ballot vote and a vote at town meeting. We're anticipating both of those votes to happen in November or December. I don't want to speak for the Mendez School Building Committee because I'm on it, but I am on it. We're looking at a similar time frame for that project as well.
That's a good follow-up. So $750,000 for 30 years. Can you just give do we have an estimation of what that is per taxpayer? So how much so often will we get a question on
Well, I think maybe to clarify, the 750 is in the levy.
in the levy?
In
Yeah,
the
it's
levy.
the additional 15 million that we
Right.
get the question on,
So
what's the addition to the
Let me
tax?
ask it differently. How long can we sustain the $750,000 in the levy and still maintain services? It's a pretty big number. Right?
It is a pretty big
And
number.
it comes from a reduction in other areas.
Obviously if I could predict the future, I'd be in a completely different line of work, especially financially. I do feel that where we are in terms of our long-term financial stability, given the state of our stabilization fund, given the fact that we have increased services, but we have done so at a gradual rate, I do feel like we should be able to, even through a downturn, be able to continue to provide services. We're not going to be able to at the level that we are. We wouldn't be able to enhance them. I don't think we would be doing a lot of one-time projects, things like that. things like the land acquisitions that we've been moving forward with. We do have CPC that is a prime resource for that, and I think we could lean more heavily on that. I think, one of the things even when I came here as the finance director, we had just gone through a period of having layoffs through the recession, and that was it's really painful because you have to lay off 2 people for every one person's salary you want to save due to unemployment. And I think my philosophy, whether I've articulated or not, is to build this organization to the point where if we do have to cut again, we're not cutting people. So I feel pretty confident about it, Ryan. Hopefully any recession that happens in the future won't be as pronounced and prolonged as the last one.
Yeah, I think Ryan's point is a good one, and I'm interested in how far do you guys look into the future as far as looking forward and budgeting, including these figures in your even 5 years out.
5 year
to say is this going to be feasible in 5 years, in particular with the the firefighters? Are they grant funded now?
Yes.
Eventually they're going to be general funded.
Yes.
Right. In how many
Yeah.
years?
4.
4 more years.
Yeah.
So including the full slate of benefits.
Exactly.
So does that fit into the plan in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, Chief Roby and I and Captain Morahan and I spent a lot of time on this. We were debating whether we should look at trying to just take on 2 firefighters as opposed to the 4. After really looking at the figures and looking at some of the projections, we felt like we could accommodate the full cost of these 4 firefighters in 4 years. But we had a couple meetings about this at least, that specific issue.
Question.
Yeah.
Mike, a moment ago, I think you were talking about the pay as we go capital,
Mhm.
and you said something along the lines of we don't have the manpower really to act on a lot of the pay as you go we've been authorizing.
Yeah.
Can you just say more about that, please?
Brittany or Jen Ball actually should be up here pretty soon, and she's actually going to give an overview of this year's capital plan. But there's a lot of smaller projects like at the schools, things like replacing flooring or, I think most of the mechanical things we've been able to take care of, but a lot of those smaller projects that eventually add up, we're just not able to get to them because we have a facilities director that covers both the town and the schools, and then also we have maintenance people, the majority of which are with the school department, as they should be. We have 1 maintenance person now too, so it's just hard to get them all accomplished within that structure.
Sure. And just as a follow-up, how are we prioritizing those jobs? Because I know one problem we could potentially run into with such as Minda's is as we're working towards replacing the school, we're still sinking a lot of money into it, as with a lot of our more older buildings.
So just to rephrase the question so I understand it a little bit better. So how are we prioritizing people? Like people that we're adding, or?
I suppose people are doing the jobs. Yeah. So just in terms of these jobs that we haven't been able to get around to as it relates to their importance.
Jobs.
Yeah.
So they're scored. We do have a scoring system that we utilize to rank the capital projects. I think that really goes into what generates the list,
Right.
that scoring. And then I think there's a number of other variables that we utilize whether or not we can get to a project or not. I think Jen could probably talk about that more when she gets to the capital plan.
Great.
If you want to hold off
Sure.
long, we could bring her up here now. So.
Maybe just a high-level question. I think 2 weeks ago we sat down with a preliminary balanced budget that you guys presented to us. Obviously it's changed. We got the governor's numbers for state aid, and I didn't compare the 2 documents, but I don't know if you tweaked the expenditures. Is there more adjusting to be done to this, or in what state is this current?
So
budget?
that's a good question. I think the final numbers, where you see the line items and everything, I think those are pretty solid. Health insurance, we'll be getting the GIC. Yeah, the finals really don't come into March, and I'm not expecting too much movement from that. We'll probably definitely see some tweaking within, like, the general government lines. We'll see some tweaking within that. But other than that, I think they're pretty solid.
So the bottom line, 66 million and change is
Yes.
kind of
for
where
the
you're
general-
thinking you're gonna end
yeah,
up.
for the general fund. And if I may, I would just like to go back to some of the sustainability issues that we talked about with that debt service and the fire department and the police department. One thing I didn't talk about is that when we do build these new buildings, we're going to be saving a significant amount of money on current operational expenses. So just for example, the lease at 91 Main Street with the corresponding utilities is about $37,000 a year. Just the maintenance of the buildings is, can add up. That's mostly out of the facilities. The ability to train our staff in-house versus sending them to train in other locations and having to have officers and firefighters basically pay them overtime to backfill those shifts. We should see savings there. Also, we should be able to generate revenue by having other departments basically do a vice versa, have the other departments come and they would actually pay us to train in those facilities. And then last but not least, it gives us an opportunity to look at other revenue enhancing techniques, like, if we have a cell tower on the building, certainly there are lease payments and lease arrangements there that could generate revenue.
Okay. Any other questions?
One question.
Heather?
If and when the public safety building goes up, do you have any plans for the older buildings downtown? Have you had anybody approached you about it, or any plans that you have?
Well, there's a lot of people with a lot of ideas,
Yeah.
that's for sure. I think most of the ideas have centered around the idea of turning the fire station into a restaurant, or a brewery, or a combined.
Mhm.
I think most of the people in this audience would certainly be okay with that, including yourselves at the table. I think it's a unique opportunity. It's a unique building, obviously. There have been a couple of people who have talked to me about, entrepreneurs that have talked to me about opening restaurants there. It really would be premature for me to start dropping names about that now. The police station, well, it doesn't have the same kind of charm, I think we can say, as the fire station.
Great parking lot.
Yeah, I think everybody's thinking, a parking lot or maybe a smaller mixed-use building there and then a parking lot. I don't know. I do want to point out that will be a very, very public process. And we are able to control that through the RFP process as well, since we own that property. Cedar Street, we can utilize as a general training ground, or we can utilize it as administrative offices, maybe offices for facilities. Or a DPW. Or DPW.
I saw you put $64,000 into the Parks and Trails Department. At one time, we had a Cemetery and Parks Department here, back in the 80s and 90s, and it got folded into the Public Works Department. Will the $64,000 include any personnel, or is that just, I assume it's gonna be under the DPW?
It will be under the DPW, and actually will be under that little subsection, which is, parks and cemeteries and trees.
Will be any new personnel part-time in the summer or anything, or you don't know?
I mean,
right?
we do have summer help. I'm not anticipating hiring staff out of this.
Okay.
I'm expecting to utilize contractors or paying our current staff OT to do some work off hours, or if they can during during regular hours as well.
Okay, thank you.
And, maybe just a thought, go back to the debt service line. You talk about that going up by $750,000 in 2021, into the foreseeable future. But, there's also projects coming off of that, right? There's gonna be some debt that's gonna be paid off, and, can you give us a sense as to what that is and when that's gonna happen?
I can give you I have a much better sense of that from the excluded debt side, because I was really paying attention to that. I'm not very well aware of the debt schedule on the non-excluded side, at least to talk about it in that level of detail right now. We have I suspect it's going to stay at a higher level for the foreseeable future, because a lot of the things that we've been doing have been in that non-excluded line.
So the big projects, the high school, community
That-
center, town hall, that was all non-excluded?
That, no, that
Well,
was all
excluded, I'm sorry,
excluded,
excluded
yes.
that. They
So
didn't
you'll
have it.
see you'll see a
Gotcha.
significant drop in FY '24. I mean, the debt service there is gonna drop about $1 million in FY '24.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I'll hold for later.
Okay. Well, thanks, Michael.
No,
Appreciate
thank you
it.
very much. Thank you very much.
So we'll move on to some of the departmental budget presentations, and we'll just go by order. I see they're all here, but go by order of the agenda. So Beth?
Hi. So I'm going to start with, the first slide is the current budget that we're working on. I think it's important to note, though, that we, in May town meeting, we did pass the local meals revolving fund that will hopefully get through the Senate shortly, so that, my budget that I'm going to speak of tonight may shift. And if you need any more detail on that, I mean, we can certainly answer those questions. But I thought it was important for you to see sort of what we're looking at once that does pass through the Senate. It already went through the House, and so this should be coming our way shortly. But just so you can see the increase in local meals taxes from FY16 through what we're expecting this year. So we did sort of guesstimate, we do have a lot of new restaurants, a few new restaurants this year, one more coming in the next month. So we're hoping to see quite a nice big increase in that, which will then become the economic development budget. But for now, I think it's safe to say this is what we're going for this year. The first line item is salaries. So that I am a department of one currently, but that will change with the addition of the new communications and events coordinator. So we've added on $25,000 for that in this line item. I do have a few small advertising costs that we do throughout the year. Contracted services, that does incorporate a few things, like the corner spot. We do a town calendar. We did Ashland guides, and we do have a nice feature that I use quite a bit is something called CoStar, and it is a tool that I use for vacant properties and properties that have recently been leased or sold, so that I can sort of compare where Ashland is on the market with other communities, as well as when people call in and say, hey, what space do you have? I have a nice tool that I can look that up. So that's a significant amount of money per year, but it is a great tool to have. We also have dues and memberships, so I do a lot of networking in our region. I'm always trying to build relationships, so that is with the Metro West Visitors Bureau, the Metro West Chamber of Commerce, the 495 Partnership. So that's where a lot of those dues and memberships come from. The next is the Business Incentive Program. So this is something new this year that we have rolled out. It was, as you know, passed in town meeting and has been a hit, I guess you could say. We've had several businesses take advantage of this program. The Business Incentive Program is made up of a few parts, one of them being the amenities financing program. This actually helps with rental assistance as well as amenities for equipment reimbursement. So these are all reimbursement grants, and that is the first piece of that. The sign and facade is another. Oh, I'm sorry. I'd like to go back to look at those pictures. Tomorrow's took advantage of this. This is a new restaurant in town, as well as Dulce de Leche. Those were the two largest reimbursements that we gave out this year, and I think they're very welcome additions to our town and our community. So the sign and facade improvement program has been very helpful to existing businesses. You can see before and after pictures of those that have taken advantage of it. Erica's restaurant was kind of painted in different colors, and their parking lot and driveway needed a significant amount of repair. So they took advantage of that, as well as the groundskeeper. As you can see, their building looks a lot nicer up on Nickerson. But the sign and facade improvement program was to help existing businesses really try to enhance their frontage, just to make it more appealing and more attractive to draw in more users. And then lastly, we do work with Needham Bank for the interest-free loans, and that is a 60-40 split. We put in 60% of that so that businesses can take out a loan for up to 2 years. They do have to pay it back in 2 years, or else they take on the interest, but we pay for their interest for those 2 years. And that has been utilized again by 2 different businesses that are already existing in town that are growing. So these programs not only welcome new businesses into town or are used as a tool to encourage people to choose Ashland over other communities, but it is also here to support the existing businesses that we have that are growing, and there are several of those. So I just think it's nice to see how many have taken advantage of it. We've already reimbursed almost $100,000, which is actually the earmark that the state gave us this year that we had to use by June, and we've used it in half the time, which I think the state will like. And in turn, it's important for you to see the personal investment that's been made by these businesses, equaling a little over 1.4 million. I also think it's important to note that there are a couple more on my desk that will go before the advisory group this next week, and then in front of the select board the following, for an additional 40. There's 2 additional projects, maybe 3 actually, that one just came in today. But for $40,000, they're actually investing $1.7 million into town, which is terrific to see. So that's the business incentive program. And then the last line is events and the Corner Spot. As you know, the Corner Spot has been quite successful. We're going into our 4th season. We do several events there throughout the year, from open mic nights to Culture Fest to Fall Fest. It's incorporated different organizations, nonprofit organizations in town. It's really brought the community together. It's a great location. This year, surprisingly, I've had 4 people just in the last 2 weeks ask for personal use of the space for a wedding, which is terrific. That would be so neat to see. So it's really become an asset to town, and there is expense that comes with that. I budget about $7,500 to $8,000 to run that, just for utilities, heat, electricity, and Wi-Fi. And then as well, community events fall into this. So we have to kind of taken on, the economic development department has taken on a lot of, just help. For the holiday festival, we help with Illuminate Downtown Ashland. We're partners in that, as well as Dragonfly Festival, to just help where we can and enhance that. And I believe that is it.
Okay, thanks. And maybe I should have said this up front, kind of the why you're here, Beth. So we meet with some of the large departments annually, police, fire, DPW, and we like to kind of bring in some of the, I'll say, smaller departments from time to time, library, yourself, and some others. So thank you so much for coming in
I'm happy
and
to
giving
be
us
here.
a presentation.
Great.
I guess one question I had, and it kind of, I think you alluded to it a little bit, but maybe you can explain when it comes to the business incentive program,
Sure.
kind of the process businesses or we go through to get something from, inception to kind of actually doing it.
Mhm.
You mentioned like there's an advisory council or something, or kind
Yes.
of, who approves and stuff like that. And
Sure. So the applications are due typically the 1st of the month. And then the advisory group is my economic development advisory group. When I started here I think it was about a year ago, we created this group just to support my role here, just to be kind of boots in the community, and just to give me somebody to bounce ideas off of. It's a group made up of 5 individuals. One of the they're mostly all residents except for one who is a real estate agent. One owns a business in town and rents. Another is a resident of town. 2 are residents of town. One is another realtor that we have. and then another business owner. So it's a great diverse group, and they look at these applications. So the applications come in, I review them just to make sure they're complete, and then I bring them to the advisory group. They review them, see if they fit the criteria, and then they are moved on to the select board as a recommendation, and then they vote on the expenditure.
Gotcha. Jack?
Beth,
Yes.
the new proposed position for the communication and events coordinator, will you anticipate that being a town employee? And how many hours per week do you anticipate this person working?
It's a full-time position, and they will be a town employee. They'll report to me.
Okay, full-time
The
and.
person.
Thank you.
Brian?
Hey Beth, thanks for the presentation. You mentioned an earmark from the state of $100,000. Is that part of this budget, and how does that?
No,
come in?
it
Okay.
is not. It never made it into our budget. It's just
We keep
It was
count on it each year.
right.
Okay, so all of
Besides.
what's shown here in this budget is, okay. And then, so if additional funds come in, how are those allocated?
If additional funds and
You mentioned $100,000 earmark from the state, so.
they would go into the revolving fund.
It's the
So,
revolving fund.
right, so the revolving fund has been established. We take $60,000 of that, it was voted on at town meeting, it goes into this revolving fund. And then whatever isn't used keeps rolling. Yeah, so we use the state $100,000 before.
Specifically for the business incentive program.
Right,
Okay, yeah, that's what I was trying to understand, because we have a line item for business incentive program. So if there's additional funds that come into the business incentive program, you're authorized to allocate those funds from the state on an annual basis.
right.
Is there an amount limit on that? On
For the
how much
incentive
you
program?
can, yeah, add on to the
At town
incentive?
meeting, it was 60,000.
And so would you foresee that it would increase more than 60,000 in the next 2 years?
If the town would vote for that.
And you would recommend it? Because the program is such a hit.
Well, it is a hit. But the local meals tax revenue that will, that we're looking at, we're hoping, will will continue to support this program.
Maybe just to clarify on the revolving fund, so is it that particular line item, the business incentive program, is that funded through the revolving funds, other sources on the revenue side, Michael, or is that?
That's
Yeah.
what I was trying to line up. It's like, where does the economic development budget fit into the general budget?
Yeah.
So, so the revolving fund was established specifically for the business incentive program.
Yeah.
Now, all economic development activities will be funded through the meals tax, which is a special revenue fund. So we will be and that budget still needs to be voted on at town meeting.
Mhm.
So let's say that line item's $60,000 again, you would take the money out of the special revenue fund for the meals tax and put it into the revolving fund for the business incentive program. Does that explain it, or did I just make it more
I got it.
complicated?
Gotcha.
I guess where I'm still lost is where the 100,000, so if is it 60,000 without the 100,000?
Correct.
So it's 160,000 if we get the 100, okay.
Yeah, so the 100,000, it's a completely separate process. That's something that, we want to thank Senator Spilka and Representative Lewis for. Hopefully they'll be able to get it in the next budget. We don't know if they will, but it's there to amplify the business incentive program and the funds that are already there.
So should we receive that $100,000, you would still go through the normal appropriation process to appropriate the monies?
For the $60,000.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
eventually maybe that's the question. Do you spend directly from that revolving fund or special revenue
The
fund?
100,000?
Yeah.
The $100,000 could be spent without appropriations.
Just through the,
Yes.
because it's non-general fund.
Right.
So I guess maybe I'm just being ignorant, I apologize. If all of economic development is funded through the meals tax, and our meals tax revenue is $263,000, why doesn't our FY21 budget show $263,000?
Well, that's a good question. Remember when we talked about this, part of what made it so attractive is that we had the ability to leave a balance in that and roll it over for each year in case there's potentially a bigger project that we want to do coming online, if there's maybe even a building purchase that we see some economic development potential for. So it gives us that flexibility
And those funds are held where?
in that special revenue account,
Not a revolving account.
which is not a revolving account. It is? Is it a type of revolving account?
It's a special revenue fund.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think, the balance doesn't get swept into free cash, basically.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So you're able to carry it.
That's fine, and I was not asking to be a proponent or a naysayer of how the meals tax is used, I just wanted clarification on where the budget number was not adding up for me. Thank you.
Any other questions for Beth?
Actually, I had a quick one, maybe you said it and I just missed it.
That's okay.
So the interest in the corner spot from the wedding, or do we charge for that?
We do, $50.
$50, okay.
Yeah, it's what Ashland Day charges for the pavilion. So,
okay.
and we charge our businesses to utilize the shed $100 per week, and 50 of it goes to the Ashland Affordable Housing Trust, because we do lease the land from them
That makes sense.
That's $50 an hour,
a week.
a week?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Or an event, if it's a special event, so
Yeah,
the wedding, it's
special,
$50.
yeah, that's what,
Yeah.
because that's the first time I heard that, so.
Oh, it's on our website. You
Not
can
for
use
the
it.
wedding.
You can use it.
Birthday party.
We've never had a wedding there. I think that would be fantastic.
We love the corner spot,
Oh,
so
good. What's
I would do anything over there.
Private spot.
Again, sure.
Use them alone
To the
time.
same-
Have you had a wedding there yet?
No, but we will this summer. Isn't that exciting?
That is
Yeah.
amazing.
And I think birthday party, and it's great. We built that to be everyone's backyard. It's the town's backyard, so
Great
it's
location.
great to see them use it.
Great
Yeah.
location. Yeah.
Good.
All right,
Okay,
thanks, Beth.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Okay, so move on to the police department. Chief?
Thank you very much for inviting me tonight.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I know. Well, before I started here in Ashland, I read quite a bit in the newspaper about all the awards Ashland won for budgeting and finance, so I know you all know what you're doing very, very well, so.
That was all.
That's awesome.
That was all.
It's a collection.
Yeah.
Spoken by a real politician.
Perfect, thank you. Before I get into the numbers, because the numbers are all important, they run the mechanics of the department, I wanted to give you an example of what those numbers represent in actual service to the town, some of the activities that the officers that you're helping us finance do. We always keep track of our calls for service, overall calls for service, and as you can see, in 2018, it was 10,702 calls for services of all kinds. In 19, that rose considerably. And this year so far, we've had 1,149 calls, and I guarantee you tomorrow that'll go up by quite a bit. So we project out almost 14,000 calls for service in FY20, which is the year that we're in now. So as you can see, our workload is increasing steadily. That's not always in a negative way. Those could be any types of calls for service. They could be car accidents. They could be medical calls in partnership with the fire department. So we see a steady upward climb in our type of activity. Citations, the middle column. In 2018, 1,297 citations of all kinds. Those include warnings, those include tickets, and those include motor vehicle arrests, such as drunk driving citations. That went up considerably, and as you can see, projected in 2020, we anticipate almost 1,900 citations. Most of those citations come with revenue for the town, so that's something that we can look at. Not that we generate revenue through those, but they're part of the ticket. And lastly, arrests. We had 163 arrests in 2018. We project this year, 2020, 264 arrests. Those are arrests of all kinds. So again, the figures don't lie. Our workload is increasing considerably. So that gives you an idea of some of the things that we do. On this slide, as the chief of police, I'm out in the community daily, and people talk to me, and they say to me what they like to see with their police department, the things that are important to them, and the services that are important. And I need to reflect those types of things and the feedback that I receive from the residents in the budget on how we deploy our officers, the type of equipment that we buy, and the type of events and incidents that we staff. You already heard from Beth about special events. One of the most popular things in town now, and that increases almost monthly, are special events in town of all kinds. You know, Beth has done a great job in the development end of things, and all kinds of special events. The Corner Spot, for example. We have an increased police presence at those events. I think you've probably seen it. If you've been to the farmer's market, if you've been hiking through the town forests, you've seen some of our bike patrol units up there. We need to be out there in the community. We need to be visible in the special events. So you'll see as I go through my financial presentation, we've increased some of our overtime budget, and part of that overtime budget is devoted to increased police presence at special events. The next thing people always tell me that they would like to see more of, and it's very important to them, and I'm sure some of you will echo that, traffic enforcement. We always receive calls from residents. People are speeding on my streets. People aren't stopping at the stop sign. People are driving by the school buses with the red lights flashing. Every single comment that the town residents give us regarding traffic concerns, we investigate. And we've employed a number of different tools. Traffic enforcement has always been a passion of mine throughout my entire police career, and accident prevention. And accident prevention comes through effective traffic enforcement. Another thing that comes through effective traffic enforcement is crime prevention. Burglars know that if they go into a town that the police officers make a lot of motor vehicle stops for traffic enforcement, those burglars will go to another town because their chances of getting stopped in, say, Ashland are much higher and then being caught when they're up to their devious deeds than in other towns that don't do a lot of traffic enforcement. That's a proven fact. So as you can see up there, we've employed some very interesting police techniques from our toolbox of tactics out there. We have a very active police motorcycle unit. We have 2 motorcycles. You see them in parades, you see them in special events. We use them for traffic enforcement. They're very effective. From a green standpoint, they're great because they use very little gas. They sip gasoline, so we're doing our part to help out sustainability. The motorcycles use probably a 25th of the gas that a cruiser would use. So we get them out there. If we had snow tires for them, I'm sure the officers would ride them in a blizzard, but we try to keep them to the good weather. So you'll see those out there. Up in the upper left-hand corner, we've reactivated the bike patrol. Again, a very green unit. It's good exercise for the officers, and the bicycles are out there. Again, these type of things we will devote our resources to and deploy extra officers on overtime assignments. So traffic enforcement, events, and the schools. All of us have a great concern, especially in these days, for school protection and school safety. We have 2 full-time school resources officers assigned to the high school and the elementary schools. They're out there, they do a great job. So those are the 3 things that the people that we serve are telling us they really would like to see our efforts focused on. Now, how do we pay for all that? This is the line items for personnel, so I'll go through these. These changes reflect what Mr. Herbert had talked about initially, our contribution to the public safety building. We did do some staffing modifications to help out with that. These modifications will not affect our daily operations. I think that's very important to note. The deputy chief position, for example, that was an approved position. We decided to not utilize that in this budget. We have 2 very capable police lieutenants on the command staff. Actually, they're both here tonight, Lieutenant Bowden and Lieutenant Briggs, and they are more than capable of dealing with the workload from a command staff point right now. So I'll go through the personnel line items. The first one, permanent position salaries. Those are the wages for all the personnel. I do have to add in, these figures reflect a 2% and a 1% contractual increase that took effect in 2019. So there was a slight increase in the actual figures. There was a $49,000 change. That's a 2% increase. That reflects the raises that the officers received. And again, that was contractual. So we have no control over that. Our officers are sticking around. We have outstanding officer retention. That's very good from the police department and the town standpoint. But the longer, obviously, an officer's with the department, their pay would increase. The next line item is overtime to cover vacations. We have a slight increase in that. Again, that is due to, we don't see any change in operations there, but that is due to the increase in the contractual fees. Overtime to cover sick time. You notice we have an almost 18.75% decrease in that. The reason why we were able to obtain that decrease is we're very in tune with actuals. On all the budgeting experience that I've had in other police departments, I always really used actual costs as my bellwether on what to do and how to budget. So we actually put in for less money this year to more reflect the actual costs. So that's why you see that decrease right there. Regular police overtime, a 40.43 increase. That has two cost factors reflected. Number one, again, those rate increases for the officers, so the officers cost a little bit more as far as their salaries. But that's an area where we did add extra funding to answer those requests of all the residents in town, to handle those special events, to do the increased traffic enforcement, to do the increased visibility, the patrolling of the town forests, things of that nature. Court overtime, as you can see, in the percent change, we had a 48% decrease in that. When we looked at, again, actuals on court overtime, officers are probably writing a lot better reports now, so there's less court time for them. We're getting more convictions with less deliberation time, so they're getting out sooner. So again, we were able to trim some costs there. Longevity and fringes, that's all governed by the contract. We just have to go with what the expenses are there. That was a very minor increase, 1.62%. Shift differential, again, we looked at the actuals on the differentials, and when we budgeted, we went more with an actual, which we felt was a more realistic cost and a more fair cost, and that had a 25% decrease. Holiday pay, again, governed by contract. We can't control that. And that had a 7.68% increase. Again, that was because of the rate increase for the officers. Officer in charge pay. What an officer in charge is normally you need a supervisor for every shift. Normally our shift supervisors are at sergeant grade. We really do not have as many sergeants as we would like, and that's one of our goals, is to increase the staffing level through the years of sergeants. So when a sergeant is out or a shift can't be filled for a sergeant, the senior officer on that shift, the most experienced officer, assumes the position of officer in charge. And because of that assumption of responsibility, they receive a small stipend for that. So that's why that line item is there. And again, that small percentage increase is to reflect the increase. Other incentives line item, that would include specialty pay, such as detectives, school resource officers, officers in specialized positions. And again, that's driven, those positions are actually specified in the contract, and that's, again, driven by the increase. The Quinn Bill, that's a program for educational incentive, higher educational incentive for officers. Officers receive more pay if they have a bachelor's degree, even more pay if they have a master's degree. Obviously, in a professional police department, the more higher education an officer has, it makes them a much more viable professional, and that is a benefit that's offered by the town. Again, a very slight increase in that, 6%. That increase, we also had an officer recently obtain her master's degree, so that's why there's an increase in there. She would get a little bit more pay. Overtime to cover in-service costs, that covers contractual raises, and in-service training is mandated by the state. The state tells us every year you have to have so many hours of training in very specified areas: first aid and CPR, firearms training, use of force, legal update, all the new laws. All these things we must train our officers in, and that's about 2 weeks' worth of training. So that's why that line item is there. Overtime to cover other training, those are specialized courses that are offered. Say an officer is a firearms licensing officer, they go to yearly updates for firearms licensing to learn the new laws and to see what the current trends are. We have officers that are very interested in drug enforcement. We'll send them to a school to learn different drug enforcement skills. Uniform expense allowance, that's covered by the contract. You'll notice there's a very slight decrease there. That's because we're not filling that patrol officer's position, so we don't have to incur uniform expenses. So that would give us a total for personnel costs of the $3102,548.30. The next page are our operational line items. The first line item is maintenance and service contracts. Those are our computer maintenance, our computer service contracts, radio equipment, anything that requires a maintenance or a service-related contract. You'll notice there was a pretty good decrease there, 32%. The reason for that is there was budgeted a camera system for the police station because the camera system there is in failure, so a new camera system was budgeted. We felt that with the upcoming vote for the public safety building, we did not want to install a very expensive camera system in a building that will hopefully become a parking lot. So that's why you see that decrease right there. That's that equipment and the service contracts for that equipment. We chose not to purchase it at this time, so there's savings. The next line item is computer maintenance. Again, those are fixed costs. Those are all our fees for our IT systems and the maintenance of that. Contracted services, there's a very big cut there, almost 42%. The reason that we were able to save some money there, different chiefs have different philosophies. In the last budget, before I arrived, there was a sizable amount of money for a private public relations firm and to basically do all the press releases and talk to the media for the police department. I'm pretty good at that. Usually they can't get me off the camera. So that was cut. There's no reason for the town of Ashland to spend money for somebody to speak for me on the media whenever an event happens. So we were able to save that money. Also, promotional services. There was money in there to pay outside services to come in to conduct promotions. We conduct our promotions through the civil service system, as we just did the last one, so there was no reason to pay an outside contractor to come in to do that. So by eliminating those two things, we were able to save almost 42%, and I think that's a good savings for the town. As you know, radios are a key part of what we do and what the fire department does, so it's imperative that we maintain our radio equipment. That's why we have a radio maintenance budget. We level funded that, so there's no increase there. We also level funded photo supplies and film. The photos are used for crime scene photos, booking. When we arrest somebody, we have to photograph them. The money that we have is adequate to do that right now, so we level funded that. Postage stamps and registered mail, again, we're getting by with what we have, so we level funded that. Office supplies, we were using all our scrap paper and saving some money there. That's level funded. Animal food and supplies, we level funded that. We're getting by okay with what we have for that, and also we've been very good. The animal control officer, Donna Walsh, has been really good with getting donations from, we have some pet stores in town that are really, really supportive of us. So when we have animals in the shelter and in the kennel, they're very good with helping us out with that. So that helps save some money in the budget. Auto parts and supplies, those are things that if we need ice scrapers for the cruiser, if we need filters, if we need oil changes, all the things that we need to keep the fleet running 24/7, the wiper fluids, all those things. On that, we level funded that. We're usually pretty careful on that, but we do need to keep the fleet in a good repair. Firearms supply. As I said, firearms training and naturally firearms proficiency is mandated by the state. We have to do it every year. We're very concerned in these times with officer safety, so we want all the officers to be very proficient in the use of their firearms. Some of the firearms, particularly the patrol rifles that the department does possess, are very old. Some of them have actually failed, so we have a program to, in a gradual way, replace the ones that are older with more newer firearms that are in better condition. So we added a little bit of money there to buy a couple extra patrol rifles to replace some of the ones that are really showing their age. Reference books and materials, those are training materials that we use, periodicals. There are manuals that come out, for example, that update all the traffic violations that the officers keep in the cruisers. Though that would also be professional literature that the officers would use. We level funded that. Miscellaneous supplies, that's kind of the catch-all. If we really need to buy something that we don't have, or we need to replace something, we level funded that budget as well. We try not to use that much, but it's there when we need it. Food and prisoner meals. We have to feed prisoners when they're under arrest, particularly on weekends and holidays. If a person is arrested on a 3-day weekend on a Friday night, they're there till Tuesday morning, so we need to feed them 3 meals a day. We have an account with McDonald's, and we buy them very healthy meals at McDonald's, and they would eat from there. And we also will utilize meals from the prison in Framingham, although the process for getting them is so long because the officers have to go into the prison, get searched, and come out. Then the meals are always cold by the time we get out, so we try to utilize the local restaurants. The prisoners actually prefer McDonald's. Other charges. Mr. Herbert talked to you about rent for 91 Main Street. As you know, the police station's overcrowded. We have a number of staff members housed in the rental space at 91 Main next to the pizza shop. It's not ideal, but at least it's a space. With utilities, that's about $37,000 a year that the town pays for that building, and that would be directly saved should that public safety building come online. We can cancel that rent and get out of there, and that building can have a viable business in it. That Beth, I'm sure, will put somebody in there with. In-state travel, we level funded that. I like it here. I don't like to travel too much out of town, so we saved a lot of money there. That's primarily used for if officers have to go to a school that's a distance away. That's why we have that account. Again, that's level funded. Dues and memberships, those are professional affiliations that the officers have. They really need to maintain those affiliations to maintain certification in a number of different areas. Training and conference courses, that primarily is the budget for the chief. As I said, different chiefs have different philosophies. Again, I like to stay in town, so you won't see me going to conferences in California or anything like that. That's a direct savings to the town. That went down 13, almost 14%. Other miscellaneous, that's different areas. If we need to purchase something that's not covered, that's level funded. Purchase of equipment, that would be more towards the capital end. And I do want to add in that we receive a reimbursement from the town of Holliston because we cover the town of Holliston for animal control services. So by contract right now, by MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, they provide us, the town, with $38,000, and I believe there'll be a $76,000 offset to our budget that Brittany deals with regarding animal control. So the personnel and the total expenses, if you look at our total budget, which is $36,18,295 and 30 cents, that's an approximate 7.5% decrease from the budget last year. So we're doing what we can. Mr. Herbert's been great in helping us attain that goal of the public safety building, and with our partners in the fire department, we really know the priority of that project, and I think our budget would reflect that. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Chief, for that.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to know, why do we have two different rows for miscellaneous? One is miscellaneous supplies and the other one is other miscellaneous.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the
That's
difference?
how it's set up in the line items. Dave has our fine detail. He could give you some. This is Lieutenant Bowden. He could give you some actual examples of what we take out of either one.
What are the two line items?
you have one which says miscellaneous supplies, and the other one you have is other miscellaneous.
What are the numbers? The account number.
Oh, I have them right here. The account numbers. Other miscellaneous is 57,800. And miscellaneous is 55,800. I have 57,800 and 55,800.
Just 55.
Yep.
850.
And 57.
55,800.
Yep. I could give you a laundry list of some of the things that are taken out of there. Pistol permit supplies, we issue pistol permits, so we need the blanks, the cards for the IDs, ink pads, biological latex gloves, that when we're handling prisoners, they wear gloves, prisoner blankets, prisoner blanket cleaning, sharps containers, medical supplies for cruisers, and prisoner restraints. So most of that is geared towards the cell block, cell expenses. And under other supplies, 5,700, yep. Those would be awards, like if we give a commendation to an officer, those would be for the little ribbons. Administrative expenses, if we need to purchase, for example, pens, things of that nature. And special awards for citizens, we want to make sure to maintain that. If a citizen contributes greatly to us solving a crime, identifies a burglar, or a citizen rescues somebody from a fire, we have little plaques made for them. So those are basically incentive type things.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I have them too.
Sure.
Are there any expenses for the sum station at Market Basket Plaza?
We have a substation at Pond Plaza by Market Basket. That space is provided free of charge by the actual mall. So other than, we had to install a phone line in there, and we had to install a computer line in, the IT. Other than that, that's taken care of by the malls.
Right, so they're still doing the same thing they've been doing?
Yes, yeah, and we do utilize that. As a matter of fact, it's very popular for the auxiliary police. As you know, we have a very active auxiliary police unit in town. That's where they meet, that's where they do their training. We have no real conference space in the police department, so if we need to have a conference, we would use that.
In my second question, you mentioned retention of police officers.
Mhm.
How many police officers have we lost to other communities, say, in the last 2 years?
In 2 years?
Yeah, I know you haven't been here 2 years.
Yeah, no, I
understand.
can wing that because I have
Yep.
a rough idea of the staffing. We had 2 officers that were left for employment reasons.
Okay.
And I think one went to the state police, but that was way before my time, I believe, so.
2 in the last 2 years.
Yeah,
One's uncertain right now.
right, so very, very low,
No, that's good, because in the
Yeah.
past, we were losing them,
very low turnover.
we were losing them pretty quick.
And they all tell me they're very happy here now, so they're staying, so, so far so good.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have a question?
I had a number of questions, but your presentation was so good, you answered most of them.
Oh, thanks.
But I had a couple of just questions for the future. I noticed when the economy goes down, in your experience, do calls go up?
I've been doing this almost 40 years, and I will tell you from my personal experiences, I've only been in Ashland since March 23rd. You're always going to have a certain element of people that no matter what happens, whether the economy's high or low, they're going to commit a crime. As you all know, there's a substance abuse crisis. Those people are in crisis. They can't afford to pay for the drug habits that they have. So when you have a habit like that, you steal. So yes, if there's a drug crisis, you will see crime grow up. I honestly, honest people are going to be honest people.
Yeah.
So no matter what the economy is, it's not like people rob banks to feed their families. People that rob banks are always going to rob banks. So I would say no to that answer. I think that regardless of what the economy is, you're always going to have a certain element of society that are going to be job security for myself and my officers. And you're always gonna have most of the calls that we answer as police officers are not crime-related calls. We go on every medical call that the fire department goes on, and I know the fire chief will show you how his statistics have gone up considerably. A lot of calls for service that we have are human service-related calls for assistance. I really, from my experience, don't see a connection between the economy and crime,
Okay.
at least in this area.
I had one other question, Chief, and that was, the presence of the substation, does that assist you in the response time? Because we had a discussion with somebody a while ago about a new public safety building and perhaps a few satellite stations also as the town grows. Do you think that that's a good idea?
I would say, the substation is not manned, it's not staffed.
Oh, I see,
There's
okay.
there's no one that's actually sitting in there at
Mhm.
a desk. Our response is a little different than the fire's response. The
Mhm.
fire is generally centralized, because their equipment is big and it's expensive to operate. They stay in one spot, they go from that spot to the call
Yep.
and back.
Yep.
We, on the other hand, other
More
than
mobile.
the dispatcher and the police station and an officer, to deal with the front desk, we're out and about.
I see.
So
Right,
our
right.
response time is pretty much based on where those cruisers are. It's like a chess game. Where are the cruisers positioned on the
Yep.
board, and where is the call?
Yep.
I will tell you that if the public safety building comes online, we will have a very fast response to the high school, because it's right next door.
Mm.
And the high school is the largest concentration of students in one spot every day in town. So our response and the fire department's response, because they're gonna be right next door, will be incredible to the high school. So that's a real plus to that building, should it come online.
Question, Chief.
Sure.
I know earlier we were told about what we're gonna have for firemen online per shift.
Mhm.
How many police officers do we have per shift right now, given at any given time during the day?
It depends on two factors. Number one, it depends on the shift, because
Yeah.
there's different staffing, day shift, evening shift, or overnight shift. It also depends on how many officers are on vacation, on a day off,
Mhm.
at training. We generally, during the daytime, there generally are more officers. There's more activity in town, the kids are in school, because during the daytime, our 2 school resource officers are working.
Mhm.
I'm here, the lieutenants are here. We have a detective on duty during the daytime. So there's a bit more staffing on the day shifts.
Sure.
The average number of officers per shift would generally be 3 patrol officers and a sergeant.
Okay.
That's the average number per shift.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, Chief, thanks for the presentation. Might be a couple tougher questions here. I think your first slide was really the most important one for me.
Mhm.
It looks like you're projecting a 17% increase in calls, a 60% increase in arrests.
Right.
So I'm struck with a budget that doesn't include the deputy chief, which is your decision, but maybe not, but not considering replacing that with another officer at a different level, and the lack of a patrol officer. So I just want to understand how the budget reflects the need for service, and respecting that we need a public safety building. I'd just like to hear your opinion on, can we have the service that you feel that the police department needs to provide to the community, and take funds to go do the public safety building. So I'm looking for some comfort between the numbers on the first slide and the significant increase, it looks like a significant increase in calls for service versus what the ask is from the department. And then I have a follow-up question, which is a softball question.
Okay.
And I'll start with that one. Let me start with that
Oh,
one.
all right.
Why are the numbers going up so much? Is it population growth? Is it traffic through town?
It's all of
Are
those.
people being worse human beings?
The population is going up considerably, very fast. All of you just look around, go to a ZBA meeting, you see all the things that are happening in town. Ashland is a very vibrant community. A lot of people wanna live here, because Ashland still, and I can say this because I grew up in Framingham, right across the border. Ashland reminds me of the way Framingham was 15 years or so ago, where it still had that small town feel. Now it really doesn't. It's like a city. Ashland is growing, and it has all the amenities that we would want here, but it still has that small town feel. You could still go to a farmer's market and know half the people that you see there. So we want to maintain that, and we want to maintain that level. there's no crime wave, so to speak, that's hitting town. There's more traffic that goes through town. Unfortunately, we sit on 135 and 126. Those are major thoroughfares within the Commonwealth. A lot of our statistics are driven by people from towns around us that come through our town. A lot of our arrests are driven by people that are in towns around us that come through our town. So there's no crime wave hitting Ashland, nor do we predict that, but there's more people and there's more business. Every day we turn around, we get more restaurants. Those restaurants create calls for service. Not necessarily bad, they could be medical calls. They could be, sprinkler alarm calls that we would still respond with the fire department. So that is what we attribute to the amount of calls for service. Going back to what you said about not replacing the officer, we're not losing a body in that case. We were short a sergeant. There was a sergeant position that hadn't been filled for years, but we really felt there was a need for that position because that would address those OIC costs, those officer in charge costs that I told you about. If the sergeant's there, we don't need to pay a patrolman extra to be the officer in charge. So the sergeant is still here. So he's just going to be in a different function, but the body is still there. What we're doing is we're just not replacing hiring a new officer that would fill a patrolman slot, which would actually be an add to staff. So we're not losing anybody.
So it doesn't sound like you're concerned about the projected increases and your ability to respond.
No, we can handle what we have. We can deal with that. Oh, super.
Yeah, because Chief's being pretty modest, I think. I think one of the things that I can say confidently, since he's gone here, he's come here, which was March 23rd.
March 23rd.
We have those dates, that date etched in our minds, is I think the productivity from the department has increased significantly. And I think you see that more really, I think, in the citations and the traffic stops and even the arrests, but I think it also gets reflected in the calls for service. I think as people feel more confident with the police department, I think as they see the police out more, there's a little bit less reticence to, maybe engage in the department than there was maybe before. So, thanks for being modest, Chief.
That's great, thank you.
Any other questions?
I had two.
Go ahead, Jen, sorry.
When I asked the fire department last year, but I skipped asking the police department, what is the sort of diversity on the force? Gender and race, and does it reflect the town, or is it comparable to police forces in surrounding towns?
Oh, I think it does. We have 3 female officers.
Okay.
We have 3 female dispatchers. A number of our officers are Portuguese speaking. We actually have an officer that speaks Russian, and a number of our dispatchers are Portuguese speaking. So I think it's a good reflection of the community. A very large, and this is unusual for me to see. This is my 3rd police department that I've worked in, and the Ashland Police Department has the highest proportion of officers that actually live in town of any police department I've worked in. And I worked in the city of Framingham Police Department for 20 years. I was a chief in Bolton for 10. And in Framingham at the time, that was a force of almost 300 officers. There was just a handful of us, myself included, that lived in Framingham, a handful. When I was the chief in Bolton, it was me and one other officer, because I don't think anyone else could afford to live there, but we were the only officers that lived in town. In Ashland, we have a number, matter of fact, a larger proportion of the force lives in town. And I think that's a credit to the police department and the fact that, these men and women, they grew up here. They graduated from Ashland High. They know Lieutenant Bowden. He knows everyone in town. I can't go anywhere and they come up and say, "Hi, Dave." So, he's been on the department most of his career, and he knows everyone, and that's what we see among the officers. So that is, to me, that's a factor in diversity too, is that somebody lives in a town. But I think we're doing very well as far as diversity.
It's great to hear. And then my other question, I think you touched on when you mentioned auto parts and supplies, but could you just give a quick rundown of the fleet? How many vehicles do we have,
Sure.
and how old are they?
I actually made up a list. I can give you an exact count. Total vehicles, we have 13 marked cruisers, Some of those are specialty cruisers. For example, we have a dedicated canine cruiser. We have a very active canine unit, a police dog. We have a new one, which we're going to be debuting actually in a few weeks, and we'll be retiring our old police dog. That cruiser can't be used by state law by any officer other than the canine officer. Obviously, somebody doesn't want to take the next shift in the cruiser that the dog was in, so there's a law on that. So there's 13 marked cruisers. We have the 2 motorcycles, which I spoke of. We have 6 unmarked cars. Those unmarked cars are spread out between the detective division. The lieutenants each utilize an unmarked car, and I actually have one too. And then we have 2 animal control vehicles. One of those was purchased new a number of years ago. It's a pickup truck with a kennel on the back that gets a lot of use. And we actually, the animal control officers, we have 1 full-time and 1 part-time. Since we're covering Holliston, they needed a different type of vehicle that they could get a larger dog in. So we actually repurposed one of our old cruisers, one of the old Explorers, took the human cage out of the back, and we put a dog cage in the back. And that, we only would have got about $1,200 in a trade for that vehicle. So we were able to repurpose that, put animal control decals on it. So that's our fleet.
Just age, are they all in
They
any
vary.
concerns that they're?
The unmarked cars are all pretty old. I think Lieutenant Briggs, you have well over 100,000 miles on yours, or?
Yeah, like 115, but the fleet, the majority of the fleets are in pretty decent shape. I think.
Yeah.
In terms of marked cars, I think our oldest is a 2014.
Right. And what we do, we're very fortunate when Jen talks about capital, we always have put in for a cycle of 2 cruisers a year, and then we cycle through them. We have found, and studies have found, and my experience in different police departments, if you maintain the cruisers in other words, don't run them till they all have 110, 20,000 miles on them, because they'll fall apart and they cost more money. If you can keep them maintained and running, you can cycle them through, and then they have value. The police department constantly donates a cruiser that it's not fit for police service, but it certainly can be used by the DPW for another purpose. So we try to repurpose those to different town departments if the car is still serviceable.
Great, thank you. That was it.
Just a quick capital question, because there are a few lines in capital related to
Yes.
the department. Tasers, how much does a taser cost? I know the capital line for $15,000. Just curious if that's
The actual taser
1
unit,
or 5.
no, that's, Lieutenant Briggs probably can address the number of tasers, but the cost with the taser is not so much the unit, it's the actual cartridges. The taser comes with 2 cartridges, and each cartridge is very, very expensive, and then the officers have to certify and qualify with those, so most of that money for the tasers is for the cartridges. We are upgrading, because the tasers that we do have are very old models. It's like the iPhones. These are pretty old. So as they get older, we have a program to cycle them through.
Thanks for the.
Are they one use, the cartridges? Single use?
Yes, the cartridge is single use. You get 2 shots, and then you have to reload it. We try not to use those much because they are expensive, but we've had many, many cases where officers, have saved bodily harm because they utilized the tasers. We also utilize the pepper spray too. So.
No other questions, it seems. Thanks, Chief.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, move along. Fire department.
Hi, good evening. So first off, I'm just going to go over a couple highlights of the department, see where we are today. First of all, my slide is on the staffing, current staffing. Right now we have 1 chief, myself. I have a captain who does fire prevention, the operations, also serves as my second in charge. Works Monday through Thursday, actually. Captain Moorhan is here tonight with me. And I have 4 shifts. I have a lieutenant on each shift. He's the duty officer. And starting this week, I'll have 5 on 3 of the shifts. I'm waiting on 1 more hire to get my 5th one on. We did have 4 off the SAFER grant, but one had got injured just before starting, so I had to go back into the hiring phase. So hopefully soon that won't be on board. Again, like the town manager said, we did get the SAFER grant, so that allowed us to bring on the 5th firefighter to each group. putting 6 guys. So that really increased our capabilities. Now we can run both ambulances pretty frequently as we do to be able to staff both and run. Right now, prior to this, we've been running back, trying to go get the other ambulance. So if you're on a call on Oak Street, another medical comes back, the engine would have to go to Oak Street or call mutual aid. In most cases, we would have to call mutual aid for making a truck go across town. So with that safer grant, again, he said it gets covered 75% the first year, 75% second year, 35% on the third year. Fourth year, we would assume the manpower. So our calls, this is 2018 versus 2019. So the fire calls is our overall calls. That's any response that the fire department makes. As you can see, we continually grow. It grows every year with the town. Structure fires, everybody always says, oh, there's not as many fires, nothing ever happens in Ashland. Well, structure fire is an actual fire in a building. So it's either house fire or commercial building fire. As you can see, we had 37 last year. That doesn't include all your outside fires, car fires, brush fires. So we do have quite a few. Medical calls, last year we did 1,590 calls. But if you look, we actually are increasing the type of calls we're doing, our ALS calls, so that's advanced life support. So that's a paramedic call, just doing cardiac monitor, giving drugs, doing IVs. That's up to 844. BLS is 361. Why is it increasing? I think our population's a little older, so we're probably seeing bigger medical problems. But we're also got a couple nursing facilities in town now that we frequent to assist. So looking at the overall budget, just going over the highlighted stuff, the permanent positions does show a negative number there, but remember, we are taking a little bit more out of the revolving ambulance fund, so that's where most of that negative's coming from. We're paying for 1 firefighter out of the 4 right now with the grant. Call firefighter salary, it's reduced 50%. The biggest reason is call men aren't coming around anymore. It's something I've been trying to get them in. They're fading away. It's hard to get a guy trained. He has to be certified, firefighter 1, 2, before he can go into an actual fire. So the commitment for them to become certified would take them a year going to the academy on their own. In most cases, they don't want to do it. And the other thing is to be on the ambulance, they have to be certified. Again, requiring them to go to school. So I think it distracts a lot of people from getting into it, where back when I got on when I was 30 years ago, you could just walk in and learn on the job. You can't learn on the job today because we can't put the risk in the training part of it, the liability of stuff. 2 other big decreases there are my overtime budgets. One's overtime recall and the other one's overtime sick and personal. More so we did more of an average type number. In the past we've based it on the highest position when it's being filled by the highest possible position, because I always got to worry, if a junior man is off and a senior man fills it, I'm going to pay more money. So we kind of looked at the last couple averages and we brought that number down a little bit for both of them. The other thing is recalls in the overtime is cutting down because I got more manpower. So going down that list on training, we just dropped it down more to an average number. Purchase of services and equipment. Looking at the highlights here, really the only number that really changed is my purchase of equipment. Again, we dropped it 10,000. That was looking at the averages over the last couple of years. And that's it for the budget. Unless you want me to hit anything, I didn't. Most of them are pretty flat, the same, so I didn't go over them. If you want, I can, but.
Anyone have questions? Good.
Chief, on the ambulance, when you take somebody at Metro West, is that a flat rate, what you charge them?
Flat rate based on the type of services we get. So you get a flat rate for BLS, you get a flat rate for an ALS, a flat rate for ALS too. So it really depends how many skills are done.
Okay.
And then there is a mileage charge, but the mileage going off the top of my head, I think it's like $30 a mile, so it's gonna change just a mile or two. I mean, we're so close to Framingham.
If you take them to Newton Wellesley, the only thing that wouldn't change here wouldn't be the mileage, John?
Correct. And in most cases, we can't take a higher level critical patient there. We're obligated to go to the nearest facility or nearest appropriate facility. So for us, if it's a medical, like you're having, we throw the monitor on, so you're having a heart attack, you have to go to Framingham. If you're in a trauma situation, we have to go either to Worcester or to Boston to a trauma center.
When you say 90% of your ambulance calls, you take them, that you take them to a hospital, you take them to Metro West, would that, ballpark,
Yeah, probably 85 probably in there.
and the other ones might be Worcester, might be Newton Wellesley.
Right, a lot will go into Natick, but actually Natick's closing, so
Right. That's
we won't be able
kinda
to go
sad,
there
yeah,
anymore.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you have any problems collecting do you go to like the Mass Health, pay for some of them, or insurance pay for the ambulance rides? Do you have any problems?
Lots of problems.
I would imagine. How
Right,
about the
so
paperwork?
ultimately, we raised our ambulance fees November 1st, which
Yeah.
is the first time we did it, and I think looking back in a good 10 years. But the reality is, what's Medicare, Medicaid,
Yeah.
they're gonna pay a flat rate.
Right,
So if we send them a bigger bill, they're just gonna pay that bottom number.
and they pretty
Your revenue is gonna be more in your private base.
And how about the lag time from private insurance? Do you have is there a lot of paperwork involved? Do you have somebody that does that, or is that?
We send it out to Armstrong Billing.
Oh, okay.
Anything else? Ryan? No?
Just any big capital expenditures coming up? Obviously your equipment is some of the most expensive in town. Anything on the horizon that you're aware of that, we should be aware of as far as new expenditures?
Yes. I'd like to say no, but
Yeah, that's okay.
our ladder truck is aging, so that's
Yeah.
gonna be coming up in 2 years. Yeah, a couple of years. It's in the 5-year capital. So that's 1.5. We do have a engine, but that was on last capital. That's on order. I mean, the thing to remember is for us, when we order it, it's a year out before we get it, so it's being manufactured now. Obviously, the tower truck, ladder truck's the most expensive we have. We have our normal rotation of the ambulances, which is coming up this coming year and on this capital.
So we'll make sure the public safety building's long enough to house
That's
the
right.
new ladder, right?
Yes.
I missed 1.5, roughly, okay.
Maybe just, the police chief was kind enough to kind of give us, these are the costs that are going away with the new public safety building. Do you have any such line items or costs that kind of will not exist going forward should when the public safety building is built?
I would say not in the line items. I mean, a lot of our training's in-house anyways, as is. I mean, obviously, we're gonna operationally succeed a lot better, because right now we're at 2 stations, we're divided. If you have to send guys back and forth occasionally, a better training facility. But no, we rent a storage trailer. I mean, it's $2,000 a year. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a huge expense, but
Okay.
we would save on that because we don't have any storage, so we rent a trailer out back of the station for all the hose to store in.
Gotcha. Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. Thank you, Chief. Oops, sorry.
Thank you.
You good? All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Doug, you're up.
I took it off.
Hi. Doug Small, Ashland, DPW Director. General fund. Okay, so the DPW for general funds, we have the DPW administration, the highway department, cemetery, parks and trees, snow and ice, street lighting, fuel, combined fuel, gas and diesel, Those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 budgets for the general fund that are housed at the DPW, managed at the DPW. The next slide, let's see, what are we doing here? Okay, there we go. All right, so number of employees. So personnel allocations, DPW admin 1.15, highway 6.66, CPT, cemetery, parks and trees 4 full-time employees, and there are no employees' salaries allocated from snow and ice, street lighting, or the fuel account. Okay. In addition to the general fund budgets, we also manage the water budget, the sewer budget, rubbish and recycling, the fields, and the new stormwater enterprise fund. Okay. Let's see. So additional personnel for the enterprise funds, water 7.17, sewer 7.17, rubbish recycling 0.25, fields 1, and stormwater 3.6. Okay. So overall, we have 29 DPW employees, and 29 DPW employees, and then we cover a portion of 4 employees from the town hall, a portion of their salaries. All right. Okay, so the 3-year overview. Okay, so what I did is I took FY19, what we actually spent, FY20, which we're currently in, and then what we're proposing for FY21. So just to speed things up a little bit, so the bottom line is this year we're looking at $1,426,000. For next year, we're requesting 1.5. We're looking at about a 5.2% increase from this year to next year, and the bulk of that is for the is from that new item for property and trails, about $65,000. Let's see. So to break it down, the highway department. So between this year and next year, there's an increase of, did I do that right? Admin, sorry. Admin, there we go. So admin, we're looking at a decrease to about, decrease of $9,800 due to salary allocations. The next one, highway, I think. Highway, we're looking at an increase of about $93,000. And the main reasons for that, main reasons for that is salary allocations. The emergency pager for overtime calls has gone up, and then the property trails line item for about $65,000. Okay, next, cemetery, parks and trees. We're looking at a decrease of about $10,000, and that's due to salary adjustments and allocations as well. So snow and ice. Snow and ice, we're looking at the last 8 years. Let's see here. The last 8 years. So currently, today, so far we've spent $328,000. Last year we spent $568,000. It's all right there, but yeah, so far so good. So hopefully the weather will continue to be mild and rain instead of snow, and that'll help the budget. And then the last slide are the salt purchases over the last 4 years. We're looking like, it looks like the average, we're somewhere around 3,000 tons a year. So far this year, we've purchased 1,897 tons of salt. So that is a look at the general fund budgets at the DPW and just a little bit on the enterprise funds.
All right. I'm sure we have questions. Who wants to start?
I'll start. Just, going into this, first year of having the enterprise fund for stormwater.
Yeah.
Just love an update, kind of what we've been doing with that money thus far. What's the activity like day to day? Employees?
Well, overall, as far as the issues that we've had so far, we've ran into some parcel issues. There's a lot of land in town that are just slivers of land that we're trying to iron out those details. But as far as day-to-day operations and things like that, that has a lot to do with putting together the stormwater management plan. It has a lot to do with doing our inspections out there, creating the plans, receiving data. What we do is we keep a daily log of what Evan, who's the stormwater project engineer, and also Kevin Langmeyer, who's our lead operator in that division, they track daily on what they're doing. We found ourselves doing a lot of work as far as dealing with private developers this year and how they'd be tracking the mud out into the street, you know, trying to get control of that situation where they need to leave riprap or stone instead of letting the mud work its way out into our drainage system. Creating regulations and bylaws. There's quite a bit going on. A lot of mapping continues to go on, and so on and so forth. But it's a very active department, and a lot of it we're also still learning too, and we're relying on outside help to kind of get us going. And at the same time, some of the stuff we've always been doing, such as street sweeping and cleaning catch basins. So that has continued as well.
Has this ramped up activity revealed anything, I don't know, remarkable about the town as it relates to stormwater? Any issues, any opportunities?
Yeah, there's some great opportunities here, and it's going to take Ashland to another level as far as managing, you know, these new projects that come into Ashland. It's going to be great for the environment. It's going to help our streams. It's going to protect our rivers and the Ashland Reservoir, the Hopkinen Reservoir. It's great for the environment. So it's you know, I don't know if I want to use the term game changer, but it's terrific what we're doing as far as Ashland. Ashland's a lead in this whole thing. Ashland was one of the first towns to pass an enterprise fund for the stormwater in the state of Massachusetts. So we belong to the Central Mass Coalition, and they rely on us to come in and teach them. You know, we went from basically like the freaking out stage, like, oh my God, what do we have to do to, now we go in and we give them advice on how to put this program in place. So it's great. We're moving into public outreach, public education, getting things onto the website. There's a lot to it.
Thanks for the update.
Hey, Doug, a quick question about, well, maybe not quick, but the fields. So the Fields Enterprise Fund, right? The fees are eventually supposed to be accumulated to replace them probably at some point, right? Because there's only a limited life to the turf there. What shape is the Enterprise Fund in, and maybe and give us kind of what kind of shape the actual turf is in, and when we're going to need to replace those?
I don't think the program's, I don't think it's working personally. The Enterprise Fund itself, Brittany can answer the questions on how much we have in retained earnings. There are a lot of factors why I don't think it's working. I don't think we're able to, the Triple E threat last year did a lot of damage to the rentals last year. That definitely hurt us. The school changing their hours, so there's one less hour to be able to rent the field in the evening for the Enterprise Fund. It's a big concern. I don't know how long. I mean, we're hanging on there. We're looking for some good anchor organizations to come in to, like some sort of soccer club or something like that. I think it's a longer discussion.
Yeah.
The conditions of our fields. I mean, we have a great crew as far as our personnel themselves. I mean, they do a terrific job, but there are issues here that some costly issues down the road that the town needs to look at as far as what's going to happen with the school. Yeah. If they decide to build over at the middle school, what's going to happen to the baseball field over there? That baseball field is the best field in town. It drains great. the one at the high school doesn't drain. Left field is lower than the wetlands, you know, so there are some big issues to be addressed here. And we're, you know, every year we take a piece we go after a piece of it. We redid the infield at the high school this year. Next year, we plan on redoing, as long as the budget's passed, plan on redoing the infield at the softball field, you know, so, but it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
you know, I think the fields look great, and I think as someone who goes around to other towns and uses their fields as part of the youth sports, I think Ashland, you know,
Yeah.
it's kind of a jewel when other towns come here and are able to play on a turf, so, you know, I know, how many years ago was that put in, maybe?
The high school
7 or
field,
8,
yeah, probably 7 or 8.
So, you know, I'd wanna, you know, obviously.
I thought Stone Park came out great with the dugouts.
Oh, yeah,
And
for
that,
sure.
I thought Roy did a great job with the CPC on that, getting those in place. They look awesome, the blue dugouts and all that. But we have some issues, the tennis courts, you know, they're kind of falling apart. But I could go on and on and on and on about the fields, but it's something that we, later in life, that we need to have a bigger discussion on.
Any general fund questions? Go ahead, Ryan.
I have just another enterprise, just sort of piggybacking on John's thoughts on stormwater. I think, you know, I'd be interested to learn about how the revenues have supported the work, and what the expenses are. And I know, I'm not sure that I've received a bill yet for stormwater. Maybe I have.
You have.
I have. I paid it, so that's good. But you know, I'd be curious. Yeah, I think the citizens are going to want to know how those costs are being managed, and if they're covering those costs from your perspective. I mean, 3.6 FTEs sounds like a lot of money.
Right.
You know, and that's only part of it, right? There's obviously the cost of all the other things you mentioned. So, be curious to learn how the revenues are covering expenses from your perspective.
Yeah, I think the budget, the annual budget is approximately $300,000 for the Stormwater Enterprise Fund. Approximately 300. The revenues are coming in successfully. I don't know what the right term to use, but yeah, it's.
Are we roughly covering the expenses with the revenue?
Yeah, it's looking, so far so good. But there's some things that need to iron out being the first year and all that, so. But most people have been receptive to it, and so far so good, but yeah.
So I don't know if this is a question for you, Doug, or Brittany, but I think a lot of times the question is brought up at town meeting as far as the chargebacks from water, sewer, and other, really, into the general fund to cover some of those costs that are borne in the general fund, pension, healthcare, and things like that. Maybe can you explain how that allocation is determined? You know, kind of what's the basis for that allocation of essentially water, sewer revenues to the general fund?
Sure, so we have a number of employees that get charged to the water and sewer enterprise budgets as well as the field, stormwater. There's one more. So all those employees have health insurance. Health insurance is paid out of the general fund. So the portion of the DPW worker's salary that's charged to those enterprise funds is then given back to the general fund for reimbursement. So if a person's on a family plan that costs the town $15,000, the water enterprise fund and the sewer enterprise fund will pay back that amount of money into the general fund. So the enterprise funds, they also cover our OPEB cost per employee, which is about $3,300 per employee. It covers a portion of our audit cost every year. And those costs, I use just my judgment and what I think the time it takes the auditors to audit those funds. Charge back some legal costs, gas and diesel, and I think purchasing supplies.
Okay.
So those I use my judgment into what I think should be charged back.
So maybe just said another way and tell me if I'm wrong. So you have an employee who's, let's say, 75%, I'll call general fund, 25% water. If their health bill is $15,000, 25% of that
Right.
is going to
Yes.
be charged back to the
Yes.
general fund.
Yep.
Okay.
And retirement.
And and retirement. So, thank you. I saw. Shweta,
Yeah, I just had a question on, I see two different numbers, two different figures actually. For snow and ice, slide 7. the 3-year overview, that one has 285,200 for
Yeah.
FY20, and your slide 11 says 328,805 today.
Yeah, the starting budget for this year was 285 for snow and ice, and it's gonna be 285 for next year. And then what we actually spent is that higher number in FY.
Yeah, the 328,
Correct,
right?
yes.
So my question is, why are we, again, doing 285 for the next year?
That's a great question, and it's not only in Ashland.
every
it's-
member.
Single one of us has
Yeah.
asked that question the
Yes.
first
The
time
new-
we have the opportunity.
Brittany did a great job answering it the other day.
Very good question.
This is so why the snow and ice budget
It's always so
is
low.
set low.
So per state law, they say that if you set the budget at a certain amount in a particular year, so say FY21, if we set it at, say, $600,000, we are required by law to set it at $600,000, at least $600,000 in next year. We can't decrease it in subsequent years. So once we raise that snow and ice budget, we can't lower it. Also, we can raise any deficit on the tax recap when we go to set the tax rate. So this account, we're legally able to deficit spend, and we do every year.
So an alternative, though, we could make a recommendation that says, over the last 5 years, we've never, the average cost is, and then we could take 30% lower than that. I mean, it does, we talk about this every single year.
At the end of the day, it comes out of free cash, right?
It comes out of our finance reserve fund.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
We could take 150,000 theoretically out of the finance committee reserve fund and transfer it in with the 285. But it gives us more flexibility.
It does.
In the event we get a very mild winter, I don't know if we really wanna overcommit like that.
Right.
Um,
But that's generally what we use the reserve account for.
That's exactly it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and in the last 8 years, it doesn't look like we were anywhere close to 285.
Nope,
No,
you're correct.
We have global warming.
it's gonna
Yeah.
take some time.
So, I mean, if you look at the budget, it's really, I think, what are we, 450 for the reserve fund?
Yes, we are.
The finance committee reserve fund, so 450 plus the 285 is kind of like the snow and ice budget.
Yeah, I don't think long ago, the budget might have been 130,000 every year, so going up to 285 was actually
It's more about kind of a
Good step
budgeting
for-
strategy
for
than anything else.
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
We should do that as part of our onboarding of
Should be
new,
part of the
new
package.
members.
So you know.
Snow and ice,
Attention to
budgeting
snow and ice.
101.
Don't ask this question again.
Let's see, any other questions for Doug?
I have one, Scott. Finance committee asked the fire department and the police department about the vehicles, so I don't wanna leave you out. So why don't you give us, why don't you give us a report on the shape of your vehicles?
Well, we have some trucks that are in great shape, and we have some trucks that need to be replaced within the next year or two.
Year or two.
And we try to, it's not a bad thing to have these things purchased. You don't wanna buy 3 trucks the same year, you wanna spread it out a little bit, but we need to replace a sander, soon, very soon, and then we need to follow up and replace another sander, hopefully the following year. These 2 trucks are 15 plus years old, and the bodies are rotten, and, rotten, I mean, the engines last a lot longer than the bodies nowadays, so, but we have 2 of them that we need to replace. The big ticket items, the sweeper, we're pretty aggressive at having a line item to maintain it every year, but you're talking $20,000 to $50,000 a year to maintain the sweeper.
You have one sweeper?
One sweeper, it's a 2004, and the guys have done a great job keeping this thing going. A sweeper, the life expectancy of a sweeper is probably more like 8 to 10 years, but like I said, our guys do a great job down there keeping this thing up. But yeah, that's something within the next 5 years that if we can get another 5 years out of this one, it'll be a home run. And sweepers are not cheap, they're probably close to $300,000. And the other major one is the vac truck. The vac truck, which is used for jetting out the sewer siphons and the sewer lines, and that's a critical piece of equipment for us too. You know, if there's ever a backup in a line, and what happens is the wastewater can end up going in somebody's house. So to have that vac truck in-house, instead of calling somebody that could take a half a day to get there, is really important for us as well. One of the backhoes, we need to replace one of the backhoes up at the cemetery within the next few years as well. Loaders, we're in good shape. We have 3 sidewalk machines. One of them's an real old one, Bombardier, but we're in good shape. We're looking at different type of attachments for the sidewalk machines. The V-plow doesn't, it's great for getting the sidewalks open to open up school, but it doesn't do too impressive of it. It's not that impressive, the results of it, you know, so. But yeah, so we're looking at things like that, but, and the sidewalk machines, those are $200,000 machines, you know, and they're critical to make sure that the schools get open, so. That's as far as equipment goes. I mean, obviously you have your rollers, you know, tractor and this and that, you know, but overall we're in good shape. I'm just really concerned about the 2 sanders. I'm concerned about this vac truck, and the vac truck is probably $350,000-$400,000, and so thank you for asking.
Yeah. I mean, I see some spending in the pay-as-you-go FY19.
Yep.
It says FY19, I mean, on the capital budget, but is this, maybe it's a question for Michael? Michael or Brittany? It says FY19 here. Should be 20, okay. All right. So, looks like it has some stuff for DPW in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think the funds are there, they're pretty good there for the road work in the near future, next year or 2.
All right, any other questions for Doug? No? All right,
Thank you.
thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
All right, I guess, Jen, you're up.
Okay. Yeah.
Good evening. Okay, there we go. So this is actually the 3rd year that the capital improvement plan has been put together in-house with a working group of departmental staff that is made up of myself, Brittany, Doug Small from DPW, our facilities director, Joe Richardson, and then Barbara Duran from the school department. The year before that, we actually hired Collins, the Collins Center from UMass to go through a full process with all of our department heads, sort of lay out a plan. They're the ones who laid out the scoring mechanism that we have continued to refine and use over the last 4 years. And so we start this process really at the end of the summer, early fall, where we email out to all the department heads the previous approved capital plan, the 5-year capital plan that was in the budget document, and ask them to review it, make sure that they, if there are any changes, either in reprioritization of the project, or if they received grant funds and they no longer need our funding to complete a project, or also has the cost estimates changed. So sometimes that gets refined, particularly as we look at things that are out a few years out. Costs may change depending on the type of equipment. And so we ask those department heads to get back to us in about a month, and then also include any new requests. And with that comes the title of the project, the reason for the project, and then also a justification. And then we ask each department head to score it themselves, and then the working group sort of validates that. And that way we have several eyes on each of the projects. This is the first year that we actually asked department heads. We were really cutting. So for the last 2 or 3 years, I think we had funded capital in the general fund pay-as-you-go in May at $750. And this year we had made the decision to help fund the public safety or build some capacity in our debt service to cut that to $500. And so we were really asking people to take a hard look at some of the projects that they had previously submitted, make sure that those are high priorities for them. And then we had to sort of look at those projects with a little bit different lens. I think when I came in, I was hearing questions about how we score it and what's taken into consideration. So all the projects have to be over $10,000, and then we start to score whether they enhance or maintain a physical asset. So whether that's building, roadways, equipment, or vehicles, whether they increase efficiency. We rate them based on impact on revenue or operating budget. So whether they're something that might actually increase our revenue, or at the very least, hoping that we're making some savings. So if you're replacing an old vehicle, you may actually have some savings in your operating costs over the 5-year period, based on how much it's costing us to keep that up and running. And then there are scoring points allotted for things that are focused on education, public safety, public health, economic growth, historic preservation, cultural and recreational opportunities, and environmental sustainability. So those are sort of some of the big buckets of investment that we as a town have collectively decided that those things are really important. And then there's other possible funding sources. So can some of the larger assets be shared, maybe with an enterprise fund, maybe with grant funding, maybe with Chapter 90 funds. So we really look at what's the best way that we could possibly, are we going to do this in debt? Can we do it in pay-as-you-go? And then also there's a capacity to complete projects, and we've learned that over the last several years. So this is a sort of a new, robust program, and what we really found is that there is a capacity limit for our staff to actually implement the level of projects that we were previously funding. And so while we are sort of cutting it by $250,000 this year, it also is giving us an opportunity to sort of catch up on some of the projects that haven't been completed. They've mostly been started, but they haven't necessarily been completed in the last year or so, and so we'll have some opportunity to catch up and continue to move the new projects forward. I'm going to focus mostly on the general fund. And so over this 5-year capital plan, in the general fund, there's 65 pay-as-you-go. And so typically we break that up into 2 different funding allocations. So we'll put forth $500,000 this May, and then we defer. It's going to be also about $500,000 this year for November for free cash. And so obviously, if that came in lower or higher, we'd be able to have some movement in the 5-year plan. And then there's 5 debt-funded projects that total about $16.8 million, and obviously $15 million of that at this point is the public safety building, and then the remaining fund would be an excluded debt. So this should actually say FY21 and not 19. I missed it by 2 years. And so this is what we'd actually put forth in this this May's budget. So when we show the 500, we typically list the projects underneath. So this is the sander that Doug was just talking about. And so when we really think about what we're going to put forth in May, as opposed to what we would hold back for deferment for November, it's really some of the things are sort of we're obligated, whether we have a lease or we're a payment schedule. So, the second one, which is the pumper truck, which is it's actually a lease payment, and so we're required to pay that. So we put that up front, and same with the modular buildings at the Warren School. That's actually the final payment for those. I believe the final payment for the modular buildings at the Warren School, and so obviously we're obligated to do that, so those are put forth in May. But then also there are projects like the sander. So in speaking with Doug at DPW, there's a really long lead time on some of these vehicle purchases. Some are really sort of fast, but we want to make sure that if it's approved in May, he would have enough time to get it before the snow starts to fall. Obviously, if you pushed it to November, this piece of equipment wouldn't be online for next winter, and that's really the need. And so that's why it would be put forth in May. And then, obviously, when there's issues of potential safety issues, we also tend to prioritize those. And so we need to replace all of the fire doors in the middle school, which seems expensive, but there's several doors that need to be replaced that will also take a really long time. A lot of the projects at the schools have to be scheduled during either school vacation or summer, and so getting the approval in May and then having the availability starting July 1 does give some lead time for planning. And then purchasing 2 mowers for DPW, and this is really to sort of, again, this is timing, that we can get this online. It can certainly help for the summertime as well as fall for sporting events. And then this would be presented for the fall special town meeting, and again, it adds up to 473. So we're just a little bit under $1 million this year. The first project is traffic lights. So there's 5 intersections, and it basically will allow our traffic signals to communicate with one another so we can monitor it, and we have to do an upgrade because our current system is not supported. I think that the police chief talked about the cruiser replacement program, and this is sort of goes along with that, as well as the laptops that go into their cars. The generator will likely, I believe, will be Warren School. There's 3 generators that need to be replaced, and this is to be the first project. And then the locker and the carpet replacement is a program in which we are doing basically like 25% of the project each year. And again, that really is about capacity and timing, just in order to get somebody in to do those. And the locker is at the middle school, and the carpet replacement is at the Warren School. And then installing security cameras at, and that's the Warren School, which I believe is I believe they do not have them right now, and it's the last school that needs. And this is a project that we sort of phased in. This is the second half of the tool upgrade for facility staff. So when we initially started this plan, our facility staff was really using some of their own tools. They were having to like borrow each other's tools. It was really inefficient, and so we've been trying to upgrade their equipment so that they can better service the schools. And also we have a new facilities person on the town side that obviously has to build up their equipment. And then the Chromebook replacement is a 5-year, you'll actually see this for 5 years, and we have to do a full replacement of all the Chromebooks for all of the students for the schools. And that's basically, they've sort of just ended their useful life. They have a very shorter lifespan than some of our equipment, and so we will start to sort of redeploy those throughout the schools. And then lastly is an all-terrain utility vehicle, and that would be primarily used to maintain our town forest. And so it's really to be able to access points in the forest that are more difficult. We have people maintaining, volunteers that sort of will walk in for miles with equipment, and so this will certainly increase efficiency and also allow for some programs to be run out of the town forest. And then just for this year, we have 2 debt-funded projects that we put forth in May. One is the ambulance, which I believe Chief Roby spoke about, and then also the public safety project. I did want to make a note that if free cash came in higher than anticipated, we would prefer to purchase that out of pay-as-you-go, and that way we're still leaving room in our debt service. And so we wouldn't necessarily prioritize or move up projects that are in out years. We would try to purchase that ambulance. And that's all I have.
Start. Thanks, Jen, for the overview. Let me start at the end of your presentation with a high-level question, because it came to mind when you presented on funding. non-debt excluded, for the public safety building. We're not able to allocate free cash into a fund for the public safety building?
Yes, and we did that actually in November. How much did we put? Yeah, we put $500,000
that's
in
what I
from
thought.
free cash, yeah.
So would we continue that practice, or is that balanced against, your thoughts on revenue spend?
I think, I do think if the opportunity presents itself, that's something that we would look at, but knowing that we're already cutting the pay-as-you-go budget for a number of different reasons, but one, just because of the public safety building, we'd kind of be
Fair enough.
not robbing Peter to pay Paul, but
Understood.
robbing Peter twice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, Jen, on the capital plan, you mentioned, one of the things we don't get to see is what the full list looks like. And you mentioned some things had to go, some things didn't sort of meet a threshold, or you changed the threshold. With the, if I remember correctly, the Collins system is basically scored. So I would think in a sort of a low budget year, just score to get funded would just have to be higher. But it sounds like maybe there's some, so was that how it worked this year, or?
Well,
Because if we have a system in place and we're gonna score things, then we should follow that good practice and just raise the threshold when we have a decreased budget year. If we don't follow that practice and the score doesn't mean anything, and then we really need to go back to, a really robust method of, capital improvement committee and a well, I'm not questioning your judgment, so please don't hear it that way. But one of the nice things about the Collins scoring system was that it could be used in a situation where you had to make tough decisions, but you wanted to do that in a non-biased a manner as possible. An objective way.
Yeah, so we certainly use the scores, and it was, and each of the scores are going to meet that the baseline sort of requirement. There's obviously some gray area in terms of, again, it's capacity. So some of the projects have to be able to be done, and then also there are some smaller projects. So obviously, the utility vehicle may not score as high as and the ambulance, right? But you actually have a finite pot of money, and so you want to make sure. And you're talking about a $17,000 investment over 315. So some of the really high value items do score high. So when we're talking about the ladder truck, that's probably one of the higher scoring projects, just because it sort of hits all these buckets, but obviously when you're talking about $1.5 million, you still have to fit it into a budget, so you still have to make some decisions. So
recognizing that we're not the capital improvement committee, I would advocate for transparency around your scoring system, and just put it out to the public, just to see what was evaluated and how things scored. Your recommendations are obviously your recommendations for good reason, but I think it would be nice to be able to see everything that's on the list. And then the last question is maybe just a quick explanation on why some of these things, actually I do have one hard question. What's the plan for the modulars at the end of the lease year here?
We bought them.
Did we buy them? Okay, I just, maybe I missed it, I don't remember when we.
A year ago?
Yeah. So that's part of, I think there was it's a buyout, yeah,
I know we
so.
planned to buy them.
We did
but I
plan
don't-
to, yeah, so, and
when
so
does
this,
that happen?
after this last payment, they're ours,
Okay, so we've purchased through lease.
yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Sorry, I had a ton of them.
Anything else?
I have a question,
Oh, go
but
ahead,
that's like a new person question again, so excuse me for that. I'm trying to understand the pay-as-you-go general fund and then the pay-as-you-go, which is gonna be presented in the fall town meeting, versus the last statement that caught my attention for the ambulance thing, which is that if free cash is higher than anticipated, then the purchase will be going to pay-as-you-go. How to determine that? Is that like, is there a amount that you
So it's part of, yeah, so it's part of our fiscal policies.
Okay.
So free cash is allocated. First it goes to, the stabilization fund, and then OPEB, and then SPED, and then 30% goes to capital. Oh, or if all those other things are capped, more would go to capital. So, so for example, last year, free cash, how much did we allocate? We allocated. Yeah, I think there was over $1 million. And so, we were able to put some in that capital stabilization fund, but we definitely had more than what we're projecting here. So we're, obviously we're budgeting for about 500,000. Conceivably, we could have more to.
Can I go back to the robbing Peter twice comment? We're not really.
Oops.
Right? If it's non-excluded debt at 750, and we happen to have some free cash at the end of the year, isn't that just an extra allocation? I mean, we can't go back and put it in line items that, we could spend it on capital, I guess. The building is capital. So maybe just.
Look at it from that perspective.
And I do think it's helpful to have some of these things explained on camera, because we often ask them off camera, and so it's helpful to have the explanation. So I think the questions are great.
For that one person watching.
Or the recordings, or my daughter. Oh, and I'll just comment that the locker repair, my daughter once a week shows me how many times her hand has been injured by her locker at AMS. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
So I'm supportive of the locker.
Yeah.
Yep.
You gave me time, so now I have another question.
Okay.
And maybe this is more a dialogue with Jim, but the Chromebook sort of made a bulb go off. I know Jim has in the past said that he did not necessarily want to continue to rely on, say, AEFI and these other sort of donations for technology in the schools, and wanted, thinks that it should be part of the budget. Are these Chromebook replacements sort of part of that, I don't know, new approach, or is it, how are we dealing with the fact that the schools are gonna continually need new technology? Is this the start of that?
I don't know that this is the start of that, so I think that this is, I'm not sure if we had supported it previously.
It wasn't.
But I know that, I know Paul Carpenter, who is our IT director, is always looking for sort of outside funding, grant opportunities, for those sort of new technology ideas. This is something I think that, we sort of have to think about strategically, because they will have, so they use these, for a variety of reasons, and so they would have a shorter lifespan than, say, some of these trucks that we sort of piece together for 20 years. And so, and then it's a little bit more like the Cruiser, where there's a replacement cycle in which we're investing this type of thing for
Are you
over
asking
several years.
Why it shouldn't be part of an expenditures kind of line item? Yeah, that was the question I had. Is why isn't it? Should we not be thinking about it more as a annual expenditure line?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of all of it. I know, excuse me, that a lot of the Chromebooks in the schools have come from AFI and other sort of outside sources. They've been teachers requesting them individually, grants, or maybe, I think the middle school had a bigger one, but not a sort of wholesale, the schools need these. And I just didn't know, should it be part of the school budget? Should it be, capital expense? Is there a new thinking in the way we're going to deal with these, I guess, was the question. So you've sort of answered it, but I guess if we ask Jim the question, is he going to come back and say he thinks it should be part of the annual school budget?
I think Jim was supportive of all of these, as well as Barbara, for sure.
Yeah.
And the school committee, actually, the school
Yeah,
committee.
okay.
I think when you're looking at these large-scale overhauls of equipment, essentially, you look at them as capital projects. And we did something similar with town or general government computer systems. We did a phased approach, like we broke it out over 3 years. I think one of the things with the AEFI is that you could only do a little bit here and a little bit here there, and It almost in some ways provided some inequity, which certainly wasn't the intent. But it really does belong, I think, in the budget somewhere, and not necessarily from an outside funding source.
Oh, I'm not arguing that
Yeah,
at all.
I know that's
Yeah.
not what you're saying, but.
So, I just want to piggyback on her question again. We have a separate line item for the Ashland School, public schools, right, in the budget? And these are separate, they are not part of the school budget?
That's right.
And why is that so? I mean, why was,
So as part of the capital program, so the capital program is really serving the entire town. And so we'll be, they're part of the working group, and really we're looking at some of those larger projects that may be building maintenance, it may, locker repair, maybe carpet replacement. So those are really capital items that are sort of outside of their operating budget. So very similar to the reason why you're seeing an ambulance in this budget as opposed to seeing it in the fire department. It's really these big capital purchases.
Maybe said another way, that the line items, general government and Ashland Public Schools, do not include any capital spending. The capital outlay is gonna be down below in the capital outlay line.
And
It's really just operational, is in general government and public schools.
And just to add a little bit of color to that, because some people come up to me and ask me, why are there so many school projects in there? And I think it's important to note, up until 2016, we didn't include the schools as part of this capital budget. In fact, our capital budget didn't really always include capital. We actually had the assessor's reval costs each year in the capital budget. We changed that around when we started, but yeah, we didn't include the schools as part of this, and so they have a focus. They have a very limited budget too, and have high expectations. So they put a lot of their money into the classroom, but again, it was at the expense of facilities and equipment and deferred maintenance. So we've I just want to point out, we've really been cognizant, I think, of trying to include the schools when we start talking about capital and involve them in the process.
Okay, any other questions? I have, Jen, maybe a note here for maybe a next meeting to come talk to us about the scoring system
Sure.
that Ryan talked about. I think that would be helpful.
Sure.
What are you doing on the 25th of February?
I'll be here.
Any other questions for Jen?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jen, appreciate it. So that's it for the departmental presentations. I'm glad you all stuck around. This is like watching paint dry, I'm sure. But anyway, I put other business on there in case, Michael, you had anything you need to share with us, or we can move on to.
Just the process going forward.
Okay.
So I believe, under our calendar that's established in the charter, we should have a final budget by mid-March. And I think the school committee will be, looking at their final budget, and probably voting on that, I believe, in February. I hope in February, but that'll give us the opportunity to, continue to have discussions about the budget, and then we'll try to put together the, budget document that we all take a lot of pride in. Hopefully, last time we got it in 4 weeks before town meeting. That's always a tough bar to hit, so I think we're gonna try to do that. And it's just this is an opportunity to actually announce that we were just notified that we were awarded again for the third time the Distinguished Budget Award from the Government Finance Officers Association. So
Congratulations.
everybody can take a lot of pride in that, especially Brittany.
Yeah, I was gonna say congratulations, Brittany.
Yes, exactly. So, awesome.
Good.
Any other questions?
No, I think maybe while you're there, we have on the calendar the next meeting of the 25th. Is Jim gonna be ready for us, and Barbara?
I will double check and make sure that they are. I
Okay.
do know that Paul Kendall, who is the chair of the Mendez School Building Committee, wanted to give an update to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
FinCom
that-
about that. Okay.
Yeah, you told me about that one.
Okay.
So I guess maybe I'll put Jim, the school department on the agenda.
Would you like us to reach out and make sure
I
that?
mean, if they're ready the 25th, then
Okay.
when does the school committee approve that budget?
I don't have the exact date
Alright.
in front of me. I think they have a workshop coming up soon, and I would expect it to happen.
All right, just let me know if it's too early, then we'll push it out.
I think it's at end of February, right? So we could
Yeah.
move out a week or something.
Yeah, we'll keep this meeting scheduled, and then, I don't know if we need to make another one, do we right now, or do you wanna?
No, we
We'll
can
schedule
wait.
the next meeting,
We
on
can
the
wait,
next
yeah.
meeting, okay.
So,
All right, yeah, so next meeting is scheduled February 25th, back downstairs in the basement where we belong.
no, I think these are very, very good,
Hey,
believe it or
Scott, we
not.
call it a lower level.
The lower level, I'm sorry.
We're supportive
That's right.
from down there.
Okay. And we do have actually some minutes to vote on, and I think Jen emailed them out this afternoon. Did everyone get them, have a chance
I
to
don't know.
review them?
People had time to review or not. I
Yeah.
just kinda didn't.
You did?
That's okay.
Okay.
I'm new, so.
So,
I did look at them. I wasn't in attendance on the 21st.
okay, I looked at them, I really didn't have any questions.
Oh, from the last meeting, are you talking about?
No.
Both.
Oh, yeah, that and one.
The one
So
before,
that answers
okay.
my question, you're probably not on the FinCom email list yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
Or did you not get it, though? I mean, I'll double check. I thought I
No.
specifically added
Oh,
you
you
on
did?
it, but
Okay.
I'll make a point to do that. Okay, so no comments on the one from the warrant for last meeting? No?
No,
Okay.
so, we have
I
a
will
motion
send-
on the, we'll start with the October 21st, 2019 meeting, a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of the January 21st, 2020 meeting.
So moved.
I'll second.
Second. All in favor?
Favor.
So moved. All right. You want to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
All in favor? All right.